You're listening to WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of St. Paul's Letters to America. I'm your host, Ray Gerard. With me today in studio again is Mr. Bob Hennekeys. Bob, how are you today?
Wonderful. Having a great day, Ray. We just started school, and it's a lot of fun to be back.
You started school, so you're studying? You've got lots to learn?
Well, I'm actually on the other side of the table. I'm teaching right now. My schoolwork doesn't start for another couple of weeks, but my employment as a teacher has just begun this past week, and it's been great to see the kids back at school. It is just such a difference from last year and so wonderful.
And your learning begins
in 2 weeks because of the diaconate.
Because you're in the diaconate program. That's right.
Studying for the diaconate.
So there's still a little bit more to learn about the faith.
Oh, I'd have to say,
but you'll be done with that. You'll learn all there is to know about the faith when you get done with the program, right?
When I'm ordained, all of a sudden, intellect will just show up. Yep.
So this is St. Paul's Letters to America. This is the program that asks, what if St. Paul, the St. Paul, were actually alive today and could talk to us? What if he could see what is happening in America today? And given our various problems, what would he think would be important for us to hear? Well, you're in luck because we are going to answer that question for you. And we can do that because we don't have to make it up. We can take the actual writings of St. Paul and apply them to today because they are timeless. They express truths that come and originate from God, and therefore they have application in this age, past ages, future ages, this in our location, every other location all around the globe. They're simply true. So what are we going to talk about today? What are we going to apply such wisdom to today? Well, we're going to be talking about whether or not churches are essential. And we're going to be explaining to you what we're going to call the essential vortex. And that answers the question of whether or not we should be closing churches in the time of a world pandemic. Are churches essential? And the letter that we have for you from St. Paul is this. I consider that the sufferings of this present time are as nothing compared with the glory to be revealed to us, the glorious freedom of the children of God, the redemption of our bodies. We hope for what we do not see. We wait with endurance, and the Spirit comes to the aid of our weakness. For we do not know how to pray as we ought, but the Spirit itself intercedes with inexpressible groanings. And the one who searches hearts knows what is the intention of the Spirit, because it intercedes for the holy ones according to God's will. What then shall we say to this? If God is for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare his Son, but handed him over for us all, how will he not also give us everything else along with him? Who will bring a charge against God's chosen ones? Who will condemn? Well, actually, in San Francisco today, I don't know if you'd call it an outright condemnation, but there are certainly critics. Critics of the church, critics of people who would go to Mass, critics of people who would want to go to Mass in groups larger than 12 in an outdoor setting. Right now in San Francisco, all indoor Masses are prohibited. They're just simply not allowed. It's not that you can't have, 10 people, including, a singer for the choir and the altar servers, and you're limited just to 10 people. No, you can't have any indoor Masses. The priests, by order of the government, cannot do an indoor Mass.
Wow.
Now, they can go outside. Now, thankfully, we're in the summertime. I hope this order gets revised before, colder weather hits. I don't know how cold it gets in San Francisco in the wintertime, but I would imagine it's got to get perhaps at least, shall we say, uncomfortable at times. But while you can now, in the summertime, thankfully, have an outdoor Mass, you're limited to 12 people.
Wow.
I mean, that's great, Bob. Just throw a wow in every once in a while.
You bet. That's the idea. You keep
limit,
going, Ray.
That's the limit of what you get.
There you go. There you go.
But it's 12 people outdoors. Now, what is the rationale? Is there a rationale? Where is the scientific study? Where is the quote-unquote science that justifies 12 people outdoors? It doesn't say 12 people outdoors within a 100-foot square area. I mean, if there's science to be applied, you would certainly think that science would say, okay, well, if you're, speaking, or if you've got that 6-foot distance where you can transmit droplets in the air, something like that. Which, I mean, if a 6-foot distance is okay indoors in like stores and things. I mean, I go to lots of stores where they have all these markings on the floor, stay 6 feet apart. And our church, Bob, that you and I go to, Assumption, you have the little strips of tape on the floor in the aisles when you're going up to communion for people to stay 6 feet apart. Well, if there is some, why 6? Why not 5? Why not 8? Because obviously somebody has determined that from a scientific point of view, that's how far, droplets normally can transfer, such that somebody else may inhale them before they start to drop too low, or I don't know what, but there's some reason why 6 foot is the, standard for social distancing.
Well, Ray, if the churches can only be 12 people in a church, or no people in a church, and only 12 outdoors, that must mean that nothing socially can happen, because if they're doing it to the church, they've got to be doing it for everything else. I mean, they got to be shutting it down for almost everything, huh?
Well, thankfully, protests, for racial inequality or, any other problem that we have nowadays, thankfully, those protests are all limited to 12 people. I haven't seen any protests on TV with more than 12 people. Have you?
No, I'd have to say it's a lot more than 12 people from what I've seen.
So in San Francisco, you can have a protest, and you can be tightly grouped together. You can be shouting at the top of your lungs at a policeman inches away. You can, congregate, shoulder to shoulder in these protests in groupings of 100 people. You can go to the Costco and have hundreds of people indoors in that kind of a retail setting. You can go to a liquor store. You can do all kinds of things, because those things, I guess, including protests, I guess, are deemed essential.
So AT&T Park, which has 2 teams playing with 28 people, no spectators, but it has 28 on each team, and then it has all the coaches and the umpires and the camera crew and that sort of thing. That's acceptable, but we couldn't go to AT&T and hold mass.
I don't know. I haven't watched the baseball game. Do they try to no, I guess they don't social distance in a dugout because teams are kept in something of a bubble, I suppose.
No, they're trying, but they sit closer than 6 feet if you watch them.
But the fact of the matter is, if the 6 feet social distancing standard works indoors, and that's, according to the CDC and everything, that's what, is practiced everywhere, then how come that can't work outdoors, where it's even... where it's even, more, where people are even more protected against getting the disease. But you can't. 12 people, period. So that's the story in San Francisco. The city attorney there is a man by the name of Herrera. I'll find his first name in a second, but whatever. Anyways, he wrote a letter about 2 weeks ago to the Archdiocese, reprimanding the Archdiocese. Apparently, they like to send around private investigators, actually. The city has hired private investigators to go and keep an eye on churches. And they found some problems. And so several of these problems were noted in this letter from the city attorney, Dennis Herrera, in which he cited, among the things he cited, were one instance in the Church of the Visitation, where there were fewer than 12 participants. They were doing a live stream mass. I guess this is when the indoors were still permitted. But that fewer than 12, that included the altar servers and choir members. And Herrera complained about that because what he said was that some of the people inside that church were not wearing masks, and that there was singing. Singing could, in fact, be heard, and singing could be heard in the live stream. So I have a question. Were those people more than 12 feet or 6 feet apart? I mean, supposing you had some singing, but there's one guy 50 feet away from the guy playing the organ or something. In any event, he didn't He didn't care. He didn't like the singing. 12 people inside, fewer than 12 inside a church, but there was singing.
Well, Ray, you're an attorney, and I'm just an engineer, so you'd know more about this than me. But isn't there something about standards where you can allow protests in the street, you can allow people in Costco, you can allow all these different things where they can be indoors, and yet a church is not allowed to be indoors? All these other people outdoors are congregating in huge groups, but yet the church is not allowed. Isn't there a discrimination thing going on? I mean, this is an attorney, for goodness sakes.
Bob, I don't ask you engineering questions and put you on the spot. Now, there is it's a constitutional standard that you're referring to, and it's called, in this case, the unequal protection of the law. Supposedly, our constitutional rights include due process and equal protection under the law. Law is such that we don't have different standards for different people. We don't get to pick and choose. Because why? Because we're all equal. But in the case of churches, what you're pointing out is the fact that it's not quite so equal. And they justify this on the basis that churches are not essential. Churches in California are due for reopening in what they refer to as Stage 3. And in that stage, the other types of establishments that qualify for reopening include movie theaters, gymnasiums, places of entertainment or optional activities, right? They're luxuries of a sort. Nail salons is another one in that category. So these are either luxury items, entertainment items. So this is how, according to the law, if you will, in California, some people might dispute whether or not it's law. These things come down from executive orders by a governor. And in this country, laws are still supposed to be made by legislatures, but whatever. That's another subject for another day. But they're regarded under this law, so-called, as non-essential.
So places where you can buy beer or scotch or weed, which is legal in California, those are essential. But a place to go and worship our God who created us, those are not essential.
So if we've had people martyr themselves and give up their lives for the faith, because what they've regarded is that their eternal soul is much more valuable than an earthly body, which at the most, is going to have, 80 years of...
If you're good.
80 years of life in it here on earth. Compared to eternity, one's way more important than the other. But now we have these laws and regulations that basically say, you can't go to church. Are we, viewing things upside down? Now people would say, well, just because you can't go to church doesn't mean you're going to lose your soul. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more. But let's before we do, we'll just get to we wanted to get through what is happening in San Francisco. So that's part of it. This one church, hey, no mask, and there was singing. Oh, by the way, so there was this song. I was driving in the car today, and I heard a song come on, and it was sung by Marianne Faithfull. Her name was, and a song from the '60s, "As Tears Go By." It was actually written by Keith Richards and Mick Jagger. And the Stones actually did a version of it as well. But before they did their version, they wrote the song but gave it to this woman, Marianne Faithfull, and she sung it. And it's a well-known version that I heard on the radio. But it's As Tears Go By. As Tears Go By. And it's a sad song. It's about someone who is watching children play and I guess longs for the carefree, innocent lifestyle, the fun that children enjoy. But this particular person, while they long for it, can't, share that. And they just seem to have to watch as tears go by. Well, in any event, there's one line in the song that just struck me. And it's basically, I want to hear the children sing. And I'm thinking to myself, well, wouldn't God be able to say that right now? You know, my children, I want to hear them sing in my churches. And here you've got Dennis Herrera and the authorities, the county health department, et cetera, et cetera. There shall be no singing. I mean, really? If we had an understanding, a viewpoint that did have things in the proper order, that did have your eternal soul as being so important, would we really begrudge people singing? Would we not at least say, okay, you can sing, but put up plastic shields and they have to be sanitized after service, and nobody can be within, 20 feet of somebody else who's singing? Why can't you do that? Why just come up with a draconian absolute no singing? There is a difference. There is something at play here. This is not logical to have this absolute ultimate no singing mandate instead of reasonable measures that would allow singing safely. Why? Why is this happening?
Well, as you think about that, about the only way is that if I want to control somebody or something else, I make a law, make a regulation, and I will do this to them, and they have to do it, even though it's not sane, even though it's not plausible, right? There's these ultimatums that show up, and that's all it can be. It's one group of people, and a small percentage of people, those that are in power, saying, I can control you, to another group of people and tell you what to do under these circumstances. And that's okay if there's something that's going to cause a great problem. But it's not okay when you have a group of people that are not going to cause a problem. By all other regulations and by all other standards, they're doing less than anybody else would, yet they're being held back. That's got to be just, I am bigger than you, I am stronger than you, and you are going to do what I say.
What you're talking about is really a lack of respect for free will. Yeah. The Catholic Church has had a doctrine known as free will for all of its existence, that basically we are creatures of God. We owe our lives to God. God doesn't even require that we love him. God doesn't even mandate that we believe in him. He gives us the choice. And that's what gives our lives meaning and purpose. If we exercise that choice to love him, even though, we don't have to. That's the only thing we can give him. He needs nothing from us. So, but in any event, what you're talking about then is this lack of respect for free will. And it's interesting. I don't want to pick on Mr. Herrera, but it is, I think, useful to understand the context of these things. We have government leaders exercising authorities in certain ways, and they give explanations for them, but, we really need to understand whether or not those reasons that are given are legitimate and, how these things may be affecting us in ways that we otherwise might not notice. And we can only do that if we understand the context of where these things are coming from, and we have to understand the people that are, creating them in order to try to make, these calculations. So Mr. Herrera, I saw one article on the internet that he wrote in 2015, where he's defending legal protections for same-sex marriages, and he claims that he is, and he proclaims that he's Catholic. And he also says in this article that he doesn't share a number of the conservative ideas of the Catholic Church. But nevertheless, he's Catholic. So he, obviously there are parts of the Catholic faith that apparently he values and holds dear, and other parts he disagrees with, not unlike many Catholics today. I myself think there's an issue with that. There's an element of hubris in that, and a certain lack of humility in that. But nevertheless, our function here is not to be judging Mr. Herrera. But it's interesting that, he claims to be Catholic but doesn't share these so-called liberal ideas. Well, he doesn't share the so-called conservative ideas of the church. Well, maybe some of those conservative ideas include free will. If you're liberal in this country today, what they can often mean is that you believe in socialist ideas. The candidate in the Democratic Party who gained the second highest number of delegates for the nomination for the presidency this year is a self-avowed socialist. Well, what is socialism? We've talked about this before. Socialism involves the elevation of the state above all else. At its core, at its base, that's what it involves. There's a book I like to quote by Igor Shafarevich. Lived under the communists in the Soviet Union, did a study of socialist ideas over millennia, literally millennia, found a lot of common traits. And while socialism has been around as long as people have been around in various forms, two elements occur among all others. Two elements always occur. It's an attack on the family, an attack on property. And those attacks are because those are the common features. And why? Because the state has to regulate these. The state has the right to regulate your family. The state has the right to regulate whether or not you get to have anything at all in this world or not. It's the elevation of the state. And a belief in God, a faith in God, a willingness to offer everything in your life or to offer your life itself for God is simply incompatible with that. That's why what was that union in Gdansk, Poland, led by Lech Walesa before the fall of the Iron Curtain. But they,
it was a shipbuilders union or something, wasn't it? I can't remember the name. Maybe it'll pop in later. But very, very, very important. But
they took strength from the fact that from the first time ever, the Pope was Polish. He inspired them. There was a resurgence of faith. It was a belief in the reality of God that was able to give them the courage to say, you know what, you can take my life, but so what? And the state can't abide that. You can't abide that because then something's more important than the state. And that's what we're seeing when people want to say no singing. Then it's because the state gets to say what you can and cannot do. Now, Mayor of New York City, Bill de Blasio, has often said a lot of things that are of a socialist bent. And early on, I don't know if it was April or May or somewhere in the early stages of the pandemic, maybe it was March, he was trying to convince churches to be closed, to stay closed, and for people to obey the orders about closing the churches. And he threatened the churches, and he said, look, if you guys don't toe the line, I'm going to permanently close the churches. Now.
Wow. I'll try my magic comment. Wow, that's almost unbelievable.
Now, just disregard for the moment the fact that he's got no power to do anything even approaching that it violates the Constitution of the U.S., violates the New York State Constitution. He's taking not only, the powers of all the branches of government upon himself, but he's taking all three branches of government and then adding to it and assuming all that power, and he's going to close churches.
Isn't that what you get when you're mayor? Is you get to do all of that stuff?
Right,
that's part of the job description?
So, okay, he doesn't have the power to do it, but he said it. Mm-hmm. I mean, it would be bad enough if he even thought it. It would be bad enough if he thought it privately. That would be bad enough. But to say it publicly, he's obviously thought about this and is not afraid to say it. Why? How could you bring yourself to closing churches permanently? He must have, is it fair to assume that he can envision an instance where closing the churches might be good? If they disobey now, then even after the pandemic is gone, they would still be permanently closed. Why would you want to permanently close churches if the pandemic is over? Is there something good about having churches closed that is still good even after the pandemic is gone. Wow. So there are, and of course, churches are being attacked, statues are being attacked. There are a lot of people that they have problems with religion. The state is all important, and God and religion are not.
Well,
and that's,
obviously that somebody that not only thinks it but then says it is doing nothing but threatening, right? You can't possibly, each one of us as a parent has experienced that thing where you're just so frustrated with your child's behavior, and you certainly aren't going to hurt the child in any way, and so you think your best alternative is to say something ridiculously stupid and over the top to catch your child's attention, right? That's obviously what he's doing.
You think so?
He can't possibly believe that.
Or
he does.
Or, I don't know, have you heard of a guy named Freud?
Oh, yeah.
Could it have been a Freudian slip?
Certainly.
I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
But you have a mayor of the largest city in this country publicly threatening to close churches permanently.
Unbelievable.
Anyways, so we can speculate and hint and guess around, why people believe as they do and what. But the fact is, how do we ourselves want to think about this? Is church essential? Forget what other people say and what other people think. What should we think? Is church essential? Now, there's a fellow by the name of Brett McCracken writing in, I think there's a website called thegospelcoalition.org, and he's a senior editor at this organization. Anyways, he wrote a little piece about this, why we don't see church as essential. And, it's not him. Forget him. Okay. Sorry, Mr. McCracken. We're going to forget you. Now, I want to jump to a fella by the name of Matthew Schmitz, writing on a website called firstthings.com. And he's a senior editor there. And what he talked about was the fact that, we're buying into a value system where our personal bodily medical health is the most important thing. And he quotes René Descartes, 17th century French philosopher, who said, quote, "The conservation of health, which is without doubt the primary good and the foundation of all other goods of this life." Close quote. That's what Mr. Descartes said with regard to our bodily health. Now, Mr. Descartes, there's a book I like, is Professor Franciscan University of Steubenville, a man by the name of Benjamin Weicker, wrote a book, 10 Books That Screwed Up the World. And one of the books that actually it's not one of the 10. There are 5 sort of like honorable mentions,
And Descartes is one of them?
And Descartes is one of them. And so Descartes was, famously known for saying, I think, therefore I am.
Yeah, a little selfish.
A little selfish.
Right? If your child said the things that Descartes said, you'd say, you're a little selfish. We need to teach you some humility and help you understand that others are important in this world.
Right. But there's a corollary to I think, therefore I am. Yeah. Okay. And the corollary is if I don't think it, it's really not important. He basically doubts everything. And so he is called the father of modern subjectivism, is what you're saying. There's a switch in sort of like the way we think about things. It used to be for the first 1,500 years of the church's life that everything was taken from a humble context. Let's try to understand what comes from God. How should we think? What should we have in terms of morals and values? It's got to come from God. Descartes' like, no, unless I think it. And he also thought that, he's also very famous for his dualism. This is, that there's a difference between our spirit and our bodies, and that our spirits were trapped inside our bodies. And it's just a dualistic, he's actually the father of, I guess, modern dualism as well. But that's an old heresy. Mm-hmm. That's nothing more than Gnosticism and Manichaeism.
Correct.
Anyways, so this kind of outlook on life where, I decide, and Descartes believed this, that basically I decide who God is. I get to decide this. I get to decide that. The proper outlook is really a subjective one. That's really dangerous. It's really poisonous. It really leads to the conclusion that there really is no truth. Now, this program is, based on the idea that, hey, there is a truth. And why is there a truth? Because there is a God.
Yep.
And if there is a God, then, unless he's a very impersonal God, he's just, the prime mover. He's just the little watchmaker. He builds the watch and puts it in motion, and there's no love to God at all. There's nothing else there except, this mechanical, force. Go ahead.
Well, Ray, I think one of the fundamentals that you hit that I'd just like to bring out for a second is if you are one that believes in God, if you are one, you want to love him and to help him, and your life is driven by him, right? And you are not worried about death. Because if you truly believe, and it's a hard belief, but if you truly believe that the ultimate goal of us is to get to heaven and be with God, death has no hold on you. You're not fearful of it. But if you are of the belief that this world is it, boy, you'd worry about health and pandemic, and you'd be scared to death of anything that might hurt anyone, and you could come up with a whole list. We ought to be sitting in boxes and not touching or getting near each other, right? Because we only have the time left on this earth. And yet the realization has to be we have to interact. We're human beings. God made us to love not only him, but to love each other. And if we have to be separated, if we can't go celebrate, if we can't be with one another to praise the person that made us, the God that made us, then we're missing the whole thing. We're missing the boat. So I think one of the fundamental things that happens with a lot of people is, if I believe in God and the ever after, I want to make this thing well for all people and make it as good as we can, get through this and take care of one another. But if you don't believe in a hereafter, all you want is what's the best for yourself at this point in time and make sure there's no chance that I'm going to die and everybody else has to kowtow to me so that I can make it. That's a big difference. That's sort of the thing that I see that you hit on that makes a heck of a difference.
Actually, what you're talking about, one of the things, there's a couple of nurses, a couple of African-American women who are nurses and Christian, happen to say what you were talking about, Bob, that, we're going to, if we really love and caring people, we'll help each other get through this. There's a piece in the Atlantic called Close the Churches. And it justifies the idea for closing churches on the fact that, well, Christians should care about each other. We ought to know something about that, about the golden rule, about, giving for other people. And Christians, of all people, should not be thinking, well, let's open the churches because we selfishly want to go to Mass, but let's do, what we can for other people. And these two nurses were saying basically the same thing, that this pandemic is a medical reality, and that, for the good of other people, we need to pray at home. So these are a couple of the common arguments, that are used. And, these nurses said, we can pray at home. Why not? You don't have to just, give up God. You can pray at home. But the question is that right?
Well, not only should we be praying at home, we should be praying with each other as well. Those are both great places to pray.
But to say that we don't have to pray in community, that we can pray at home and that that's enough, is that right?
Can't be.
So we just got through talking about Mr. Descartes and this whole subjective kind of way of looking at the world. I look at it through my eyes. Mm-hmm. There might be an objective truth out there. There might be a scientific truth to things, but it doesn't matter. I'm going to look at things the way I want to look. Subjectivism. But the idea of praying at home, that's subjective and selfish as well. I mean, that's founded in self-love, because the idea of praying at home involves, to some extent, what can I get? I'll establish, some connection with God privately in my own bedroom, my own living room, whatever. I don't need other people. Fine. Well, maybe that's true, although it really isn't. But even if that was true and you didn't need other people, you're not giving to anybody else.
You bet.
When you come together in prayer, it's not that you're just getting, you're giving. You're giving people confidence in the fact that, hey, I believe too, and that helps them to believe. So it's more based on what can I get? I want to get from God, and I can get that privately. I don't need you. And it's really not that much of a stepping stone. I don't need you to help me worship God. Is it that far of a jump to then say, I don't need God? We've got people like the brothers Cuomo in New York basically saying things like, we don't need God. We did this. We can make the pandemic numbers go down in New York. We don't need God. Is it that far of a stepping stone? I don't need you. I don't need God. I mean, it's not. We draw strength from praying together. When we pray, look, is it necessary? Let me suggest this. One reason why church is essential is this: we need help praying. Part of the quote we have from St. Paul is, we need help praying. We don't know how to pray as we ought. Well, we can draw strength from other people in praying. And if we don't have to go to Mass every Sunday, will we? Will we spend 45 minutes, an hour in private prayer on a Sunday morning when we don't have to? Or will we wander a little bit? I know, heck, even during prayer, my mind wanders. I don't stay focused on Him and offering things to Him or asking Him what He wants me to do. My thoughts wander all the time, thinking about things the way I want to think of them. Well, heck, if that happens during prayer, how about, if you're not praying, how much can you wander then? So do we need to have churches? Do we need to come together to pray? Yeah, if just for 1 hour a week, we can not wander.
St. Paul, who is basically the author of this show, right? He made some statements in his writings that I think are absolutely beautiful, and he likened each of us to a part of the body. He basically said that each one of us brings different skills and talents to the party, and that none of us have the great capability to do all of it. So if you make a statement that we don't need to come together as a community, that would be almost as if someone that was a leg said, I don't need the arms, I don't need the heart, I don't need the brain, I'm good enough to live on my own. And the fact of the matter is that we as a community have to come together because each of us has shortcomings. Each of us has things that we do well, each of us has things that we really need. And if we come together, we furnish that to each other, we take care of one another, we cherish each other, and it's not about me getting what I need, but it's us as a community getting together what we can do to worship God. And when you strike us from the community, when you separate us, that's like somebody who's a fingernail having to figure out how to try to make it on their own as just a fingernail. It is not by ourselves.
So you're in the diaconate program, Bob, and before they allow you to actually be a deacon and go out and help minister to people, and in places, a lot of churches will allow, certain dioceses will allow deacons to give homilies. So before you go out and minister to the people and before you go out and preach to the people, are you supposed to learn anything?
Oh, a lot. And
are you supposed to draw? Yeah, are you supposed to draw on the workings of people for thousands of years? Do you need other people to help you understand the Bible, or can you just understand it all on your own? No, we need other people. But let me add to that even more. We need God.
Yeah.
And before we even talk about the Eucharist, what did Christ say? I think it's Matthew, I think it's chapter 18, where he says, wherever two or more are gathered, I am there.
Yeah.
If you're alone praying in your room, I mean, he didn't say, whenever you pray to the Heavenly Father, I'll be there with you. He didn't say that. Do we, in our modern, subjectivist, Descartesian kind of way at looking at things, think, okay, well, Jesus said that, but he also meant, when I'm praying alone, he's there with me. I mean, do we judge for us? I mean, Jesus is always with us. He always cares. He always loves. But he wanted to make a point that there's something different when two or more are gathered together in prayer. He thought it was important. Christ thought it was important. The county health department in San Francisco says different. Okay, fine. I mean, now, so God is there. God is there. And that's even before you even get to the Eucharist. And we could spend a lot of time on the Eucharist. But let me add another element in here. A few minutes ago, we talked about this idea that, when people come together in prayer, they gain confidence in the fact that other people agree with them. Other people believe. Other people believe. As a matter of fact, one of the best ways to evangelize, I don't know how many people have always said it, the best way to evangelize is by just simply how you act. I mean, St. Francis of Assisi famously said, preach always, and if you have to, use words. You preach by what you do. If you come to church on Sunday, you believe. And you tell other people you believe, and other people tell you they believe, and together you're stronger on account of it. Lord knows we're plagued by doubts all the time about things. How progressed would those doubts become if we never had anybody ever help giving us some reassurance? We draw strength from that. And when we draw strength, when we draw confidence from the fact that other people agree with us, when we feel that a little deeper because other people agree with us, if we see somebody else, kneeling to receive the Eucharist perhaps, or what have you, we see somebody else maybe kneeling in prayer before the Mass begins. I mean, whatever. We draw something from that. You were talking about or parts of one body. That's how it works. We draw something from these other people. And so then what happens? Then our prayers get a little more fervent, a little deeper. When you believe, your prayers are more powerful. What did Jesus say about, if you have faith, you can move a mountain. If you pray with no faith, okay, that's good, but boy, it just has nowhere near the magnitude of when you pray with faith. So that obviously helps. Well, let me ask you, let's get to this idea of the vortex. I'd love to talk about the Eucharist for hours. But let me just say this. In preparation for this program, I spent an hour in adoration. And something that I hadn't thought of before came to me, which is not unusual. A lot of things come to me in adoration that don't come to me elsewhere. And one of them was this. Imagine an arrow going up and an arrow going down. Or maybe put it this way. How about an arrow going left to right and one going right to left? Just two arrows, one going one direction and one going back in the direction from which, the first one came. What does that entail? Stops and starts. Stops and starts. Supposing you have a coach who says, okay, I want you to do a bunch of wind sprints. Line up on the 50-yard line, run down to the goal line, and then run back, and just do a bunch of wind sprints. What are you doing? You're stopping and starting, stopping and starting. Does that take more energy than just running in a circle around a track? You bet it does. You bet it does. Take someone on a tennis court, and they got to go from one sideline, stop, go to the other. I mean, tennis players, they run drills all the time, but that's nothing. Where they do nothing but that. It's that lateral movement because you have to get in shape to do that for 2 or 3 hours in a tennis match because it takes more energy to stop and start. Okay, now another image. Now this one's a different image. Instead of 2 arrows, you got 3 arrows. And they're in a circle. You have 3 arrows. You have a circle, and then just break it up into 3 arrows. Just break that circle up into 3 arrows. Now what have you got? You've got constant motion. You've got a flow. It's really a mirror of the Trinity, is it not? I mean, Trinitarian love is perhaps thought of as a circle composed of 3 arrows. The Father loves the Son loves the Holy Spirit loves the Father, and around it goes. And what happens, what do you get with that? It goes round and round. Is there ever an end? Is there ever a stop or a start? No, it never ends. It's a circle. It just keeps going round and round. You have the 2 arrows. One arrow goes off to the left for, I don't know, a foot, whatever, a couple inches, whatever. And then it stops. In a circle, there is no stoppage. What is that? That's infinity. Right? That's a symbol. That's a symbolic representation. The circle is a symbolic representation of God. What happens when you pray alone in your room? Maybe your prayer goes up. Maybe a little grace comes down. Up, down, back, forth. Okay. You're talking to God. That's good. What happens when you go to church? And 2 or more. You got 3 people now. You got a priest. You got, let's say 3 or more. Okay, we got a bunch. What happens then? Supposing we don't have just me and God. Supposing we add some other people to this mix. Do we have something that's maybe in the image of that Trinitarian love? Something that perhaps is in the image of God, where we're forming a circle of love, where, I love the guy next to me. Together we love God. He loves us in return. That goes round and round. That's a different story. And what can happen with that? How about like a vortex in the ocean or something? You get sucked in. Or you take a hurricane that spins around the eye of the hurricane. There's tremendous force in that. We talked about the fact that, hey, when you have other people praying with you, you draw strength from their belief. You draw greater confidence in the justness of worshiping God. And then your prayers get a little bit more fervent, get a little stronger. The vortex begins. You have a circular kind of a love that never stops, and it just gets stronger and stronger. I call that the essential vortex. It is essential to go to church. It is essential for 2 or more to gather and pray to God in a church, in an open church building. It is right. It is just. It's offering to God. It is so convenient just to, pray when we want. I'm at home. Okay, well, I'll think about God and I'll pray to him. When you go to church, you've got to get dressed. You got to get in the car. You got to do this. You got to do that. It's more than just a passing thought. There's a little effort that's involved. That's right and just. It's the minimum of what he is due. We owe everything to him. It's the minimum of what he is due. And now we have government authorities who say that going to church is not essential. And all of this is even before we even begin to talk about the Eucharist. Not essential to go visit the real presence in the tabernacle, God himself still on earth. Oh boy.
There was a period of time, roughly 2,000 years ago, when a group of people were told not to get together to worship God. And they hid and quietly went out and went into places and worshiped together. When I lived in China, You couldn't worship together unless you had government approval, and there were rules and regulations what you had to do. You were, in essence, told what to do. Yet people are getting together quietly in people's living rooms to get together and pray. Governments have always had some sort of reason to stop church from going on, and yet people that truly believe have always figured out some way to truly get together, to take care of one another, and to love our Father, His Son, and the Holy Spirit with all our heart and soul, because that is what's right. People have been doing this throughout history, and now is a great time for us to continue to figure out how to do this and take care of one another, love one another, and be in church together. It's got to be the only answer.
Well, this is a serious topic. This is a serious topic because it involves nothing less than how we think about the church as a society. You may say church is absolutely essential for the well-being, for our well-being, because we can wander, we can stray from God. We can wander, we can stray from the truths of the morals and values that come from God. And we need to gather together in prayer to keep us on the right track. You can talk about the Eucharist. You can talk about so many different. You can talk about it's just and right to give praise to God. You can say that it's so essential to go to church, but for right now, just to keep other people safe, we're going to limit it, or we're going to practice these kind of precautions. But we're not doing that. We're not saying church is essential. And then that will shape how we think about whether God is essential. This is hugely important. It's how we think about things. And the danger in this is our ways of thinking can change without us even noticing. They can slip in like in the dark of night, and before we even know it, we've gone down the road farther than we think. It's a very slippery slope. Church is essential. It's essential for so many reasons. And one of them is because there's an essential vortex of praying to God, having God there to give us strength, drawing strength from other people who form parts of the body of Christ. It's essential for us to remain strong in our faith, and to be connected with God, who is the source of our salvation for eternity, not just our physical health for the few years we're on this earth.
And I think, Ray, if you break the vortex for even just a short period of time, it's decimated. And it takes a phenomenal effort to get it restarted.
Yeah.
To say, I can do this for a short period of time, it's only going to be a month or 2 months, is absolutely the wrong way to go. To let us continue this vortex and let us continue to take care of and cherish one another has got to be the only answer.
Yeah, that's certainly possible, isn't it? That some people who get into the habit of not going to church may then stay away. And then what happens after that? I mean, there's real danger to all of this. You're absolutely right. Well, this has been another edition of St. Paul's Letters to America. We hope that we've given you something to think about. We hope we've been somewhat provocative. And we hope you'll join us again. And until you do, on behalf of me and my co-host, Bob, may God's choicest blessings be with all of you.
Amen.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
To a production of WCAT Radio. Please join us in our mission of evangelization. And don't forget, love lifts up when knowledge takes flight.